Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, live from the UK, our guest is the groundbreaking author and public speaker, David Icke. His book, The Biggest Secret, has been called the conspiracy theorist Rosetta Stone. Indeed it is. He has spoke all around the world. His speaking events are watched by thousands on every continent. Even mainstream scientists are concluding that reality is indeed a simulation. He's been speaking about that for years. But tonight we're going to discuss Renegade, the life story of David Icke. It's a feature film about his life and work, but it has been released by The Orchard, but it has also been banned. Renegade was shot in 4 countries through the summer of 2018. And it brings everything to a new level. This is a film that will go down in history if you are able to watch it. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, David Icke. David, good morning, man. How are you?
Morning, Jimmy. As well as I can be expected at 3:30 in the morning, mate.
Yeah, right. 3:30 in the morning. And thank you for doing this. You know we appreciate it, David. And before we get started, you were scheduled to be with us a couple of weeks ago, and you said to me, Jimmy, I've got to apologize, but I need to get out of town and take a break. I need some rest. How are you doing, man? Are you bushy-eyed and bushy-tailed and bright-eyed?
Yeah, I'm good. I had a week watching steam trains. I've been a fan of steam trains since I was a little boy in Leicester, in the English Midlands, which had about 3 railway stations. And so my childhood had steam trains. It was part of life. You know, it's what was pulling trains in those days. I'm old, you see, and so there's a lot of preserved lines in Britain, which basically just looked like it was when I was a kid. So I had a great week and up and running again.
I would call that watching heavy metal.
Yeah, but the heavy metal, yeah, because the engines are very heavy. Yeah, that's true. It is heavy metal, but it's everyone's got their own little way of chilling out, and that's mine. And it's kind of interesting, you know. You sit there on a train, or you're sitting at the side of the line watching them go past, and it just brings back so many memories of when you were a kid. Because my childhood was playing football and watching steam trains. That was my upbringing. So I had a great week. But as always, I'm up for what's coming now, and I think, you know, this next year and even the next few months are going to be very interesting. I mean, Renegade's out, which has gone down fantastically well, which is very pleasing. And I've got a book coming out in September, which is, let's just say, even for me, it's highly controversial. So that's going to be interesting to see the reaction to that.
What? You just scared me. You just scared me. And let's back up a step here. The last 6 months have been pretty crazy. It should have been excellent and fun and rewarding, but the incident went down with the Australian government when you were here in Los Angeles. Of course, you were on the show and we talked about that. And then the excitement of the film, you know, it getting finished and getting released, the damper was put on that too as well. And before we get to what went down here in Los Angeles with the film and also in London, I want to ask you this. What is it about the press and the media where they can't sit down and talk to you straight, and where we can just clear their heads on the myth, right? The folklore, the legend of David Icke versus the reality of David Icke? Why can't they? Is it for clicks? They just want the sensationalism of promoting something about you that just, quite frankly, isn't true?
No, I think you know, the film actually comes into this in a way, because the reason that a theater in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, called the Aero Theater, which is owned by an organization called American Cinematique, and also own the Egyptian in Los Angeles, is because literally it puts me in a good light. We were supposed to have a premiere of Renegade at that theatre some weeks ago now, and it had all been organised by the makers of the film, not by me. And the makers of the film, by the way, weren't making the film because, let's promote David Icke. They just thought it would make a good film and make an interesting movie. So it was supposed to happen about 6:30 in the afternoon, this premiere. People were supposed to arrive. And we were arriving at the Aero Theatre for a 4 o'clock meet to have a technical run-through. 5 minutes to 4 it was. We're about 2 blocks from the theatre. The phone rang in the back, the producer's phone, the producer of the film. And although he had the phone to his ear, I'm sitting in the front. I heard every word because this guy at the other end is screaming. And this was part of the conversation. Is this a film about David Icke? Well, yeah. Does it put him in a good light? Well, yeah, it comes across well, yeah. Well, so we're not having it then. And you see, when you're putting out information that the system doesn't want people to hear, big time doesn't want them to hear, then if you can't demonize someone for what they're saying, then demonize them for what they're not saying, and that will give you an excuse, because most people won't check. I mean, this guy on the end of the phone, he's just panicking because someone's had a go at him. What are you doing having this David Icke film on your theatre? And it's the same coming round to your question. The press don't want to talk to me. The mainstream media don't want to talk to me because they will have to, although they would obviously spin it as usual, but they would have to somehow get something across about me that wasn't what people are told I am. And also, crucially, if they talk to me, then they're giving me publicity which will get people interested in looking at what I'm saying. None of these things are what the system want. So what they want to do is not talk to me, so they don't give me publicity, but that is anyway positive, but demonize me so that people have the excuse to ban my meetings, to ban me from Australia, and to try to ban the movie. And you see, this movie, there's nothing in this movie whatsoever. In fact, from what I understand, I'm only speaking third party here, there were efforts for a major platform to ban it, ban Renegade. And they put it into a situation of being reviewed. Well, from what I gather, they have reviewed it and can't find any reason to ban it, right? So there's nothing in the film that is in any way saying anything that people could take offense to. But it shows me as I am. It's very much based on fly on the wall. It follows me around. It follows me to events and covers events and follows me between events and what have you. And whether people like what they see or not is not the point. The point is what you see is me. Now that again is not something that the system wants people to see. They don't want to see the real me. They want people to see the me that they have concocted and demonized. And so this is what's happening. You see, years and years ago, Jimmy, for year after year, decade after decade, the mainstream media, particularly in Britain, just ridiculed me. I was the national nutter of Britain. And then this transformation took place, not least because so much, vast amounts of what were in my earlier books that started to be read on the television news in changes in society. And this started to give me real credibility among people. So, hold on a minute. Well, he can't be that much of a nutter because what he said 10 years ago is happening. And from that point, it's the ridicule started to diminish in the mainstream media, and the abuse and demonization began. And that's what's continued ever since. And it's extraordinary, if you're a journalist, what you do, a proper journalist, is you hear what is said about someone, and then you contact that someone and you talk to them about it. If you're a venue owner and someone contacts you and says you shouldn't have this man on your venue because of ABC, what you do is you say, okay, well, now I'm going to talk to the guy and get his side of it. That never happens. They print stories about me, but they never talk to me. We have venues who cancel events at the last minute, but never talk to me. It's confirmation in a way that I'm saying something right. That the whole, I mean, take the Australia thing. This is an extraordinary example. See, you put out suppressed information. I communicate suppressed information, and to understand the power of that and the fear that this system has for information that they don't want people to hear. Australia is a classic because there's 25 million people in Australia. You've got the Australian government, you've got the Australian military, you've got the Australian media, which almost in its totality puts out the official narrative 24/7. And yet they feel necessary to ban me from entering the country to speak in 6 events at Australian cities for an evening and then leave. They're just terrified. So that's the power of this information. And that's, Jimmy, of course, why we're seeing now this gathering, relentless censorship on the internet by Silicon Valley, which is owned by this cabal I've been uncovering for 30 years. It's because they're terrified of the information, because there's been a period with the internet, because the internet was created for human control. That's what it was created for. It doesn't have to be for human control. It can be for human freedom and global discourse, which is all a great thing. But it was created to control for reasons I go into in the books and I can elaborate on. But there was a period when they had to sell the internet. They had to sell the internet to people. They had to make the internet the foundation pillar of human society. And so in those early years, you would not have built the internet with the censorship you're having now. What you had to do was have an uncensored internet. You had to have an uncensored Facebook, so that could become the giant monolith that it is now. You had to have an uncensored Google, etc. But once you reach the point where you think, okay, the internet's now the central pillar of human society. Facebook is basically a monopoly. Google's a monopoly. Now we have the power to do what we planned all along, and that's why this whole censorship is now kicking on and kicking off with an extraordinary extension of it with Project Veritas in the last few days. Therefore, in that period when they had to have a free internet to sell the internet, this information could circulate unmolested, and it has had such an effect, as you will know from your show, that they're now in a point of panic. I mean, it's almost desperation. We've got to shut this down, and that's what we're seeing, and that's what's happening to me. That's why me, an individual living in this little flat in the Isle of Wight in England, is considered such a danger to the government and system of Australia, among many others.
Do you feel, David, that if a politician or critic or journalist that has been out for you over these years went and actually sat through one of your speaking engagements, they would walk away going, well, I don't know what everybody's on about. That was actually pretty cool. There's nothing there but information and things to think about. But there isn't any, you know what I mean? There aren't any bombs going off. It's not like you're threatening, you know what I mean? There isn't anything negative. It's quite simply things that we need to be concerned about, or maybe we should question But that's it. Don't you think they would walk away fairly disappointed that you're not the radical guy that they've been speaking about?
Yeah, well, I am radical, but I'm not what they say I am.
Well, you understand what I'm saying,
I know
right?
exactly. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Well, I have an example of that. I spoke in the north of England maybe a couple of years ago, and a journalist turned up just out of interest and watched the 4-hour presentation, and it basically changed his life. Because the pennies dropped all over the place about how the world's actually controlled. Because let's not fall into the trap of thinking that because people are journalists, they know what's going on in the world. That they don't. I was a journalist in the mainstream for years in newspapers and radio and television. I can tell you, anyone who's not been in journalism, they do not know what's going on in the world. That's not the idea. And there's also this pressure, you see, because if you're a journalist that seeks the truth and you're working in the mainstream, then you won't be very popular if you cross the line into putting out stuff that the system doesn't want people to see. I've had journalists over the years say to me, I remember one in particular on a national newspaper in Britain, look, I agree with you, but I'm going to have a go at you a bit in the interview and then try to get some good stuff out among the having a go at you. Because if I don't have a go at you, she said, it won't get in the paper. So this is what you're dealing with. And journalists, of course, their bottom line is I've got a mortgage to pay. And what am I going to do if I get shut out from the mainstream media? So there are these economic pressures as well, which turn journalists into basically tools of the system. Most of them because they don't know that they're tools of the system, and some they know they are, but they've got a mortgage to pay.
That's right.
And it's so there's pressures like this all over the place, and this comes from having a cabal that controls government, media, Silicon Valley, banking, major corporations. When you have this spider in this web of control, then wherever you look, it's going to be seeking to shut you down, whether it's the Aero Theatre in Santa Monica or a national newspaper. And let's not avoid the elephant in the living room here about what is behind this demonization of me and demonization of much else. And that is a protection racket. That's what I call it, a protection racket, operated out of Israel. The thing is, if you look at the world, it's very simple. You look at any group of people, no matter what they are, no matter what their religion is, doesn't matter what their background is, whether they're Muslim or Jewish or Christian or atheist or black or white or sky blue, bloody pink. What you have in all those groups, without fail, anywhere in the world, are lovely people, genuine people, nice people, okay people, and psychopaths at the extreme. And this is the trick. When you talk about the psychopathic part of a group, then what they do is say, you are saying that all of that group are psychopaths. No, I'm saying a tiny number. So if you take someone, for instance, like George Soros, George Soros has a network called the Open Society Foundations, which operate in 100 countries, and demonstrably, through leaked emails, leaked documents, people's personal experience who've come out and talked about it, is manipulating politically and in many other ways. Provable fact. Now, I'm for instance, I'm exposing George Soros, as other people are too, not because he's Jewish, but because of what he's doing. And you know that this anti-Semitism protection racket is a protection racket when you see that when Jewish people criticize people like Soros or criticize the far-right government of Israel, that they are abused by this protection racket even more vehemently than non-Jewish people. Why? Because it's very easy to silence criticism of the far-right government in Israel by saying it's just anti-Semitism. If you're Jewish and you're saying it, which of course many Jewish people are, then that's very much more difficult. How do you say that a Jewish person is anti-Semitic? They try staggeringly, but it's more difficult. So they want to shut them down even more, and so we've got a Labour Party in Britain, the opposition party, which has been expelling people for anti-Semitism. A number of them have been Jewish. There was this one guy who he served in the Israel Defense Forces as a conscript. Then he stayed on for a while and did some basically PR work for them. Saw what was happening to the Palestinians and started to think differently about what he'd been told all his life. Came to Britain and was looking for a political party that he could express his concern about what was happening in Israel. He's been expelled from the Labour Party because he joined the Labour Party thinking that was the vehicle for anti-Semitism. The guy's not only born in Israel, not only Jewish, but he had relatives who suffered in Nazi Germany, and he's an anti-Semite. There are people that suffered in the concentration camps, Jimmy, who are being attacked by this protection racket as anti-Semitic. And of course it's not because they are, it's because it's a vehicle and a means to shut people down. And this protection racket is absolutely vast and is operated out of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is connected to the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu, in Israel. And this is what's behind it. Anyone that says anything that is questioning of a Jewish person, like Soros, it's anti-Semitic. My question is it true? Is he doing this? Well, of course he's doing it. It's provable fact. But the protection racket says we can stop you exposing that by saying you're just an anti-Semite. And that's the whole foundation of where this is coming from. And it's become such a toxic term that when people call venues and they say this guy's an anti-Semite and he's going to attack Jewish people at your venue, their backbone starts vibrating very quickly and they cancel the event. But you've been to my events, you know that's not true.
That's right.
People who watch Renegade, Jewish people are not even mentioned in the film, but they're still trying to use this guy's an anti-Semite to stop people seeing it because it puts me in a good light. So this is what you're dealing with. And I know from my own experience that more and more Jewish people, not least in America, young Jewish people in America, are getting absolutely sick and tired of this a use of them, an abuse of them, to shut down free discourse.
I've got to take a break right here. I've got 2 minutes, so let me get one question in and try to get a quick answer.
Okay.
Which is this: when we are dealing with all of this, David, the internet now is empowering those that they want to have the juice. And they have the ability to choke down views now, and they realize that, of those that are running these companies that they don't agree with. But the vast majority of the world doesn't know about this, and they only see what is fed to them in this Orwellian sense.
Exactly.
Is there any way to turn this around, or is the power too complete?
Well, it's getting close to that, but the only power you can use, which is the power that we've discussed they are terrified of, is information circulating. And I would say this, you talk about the shutting down, quite rightly, of the free discourse on the internet through the Silicon Valley giants. One of the major frontline organizations that Facebook and Google and all these other people use to, quote, advise them what should be deleted and what shouldn't be, is an organization called the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. It's based in America, but it's one of the frontline organizations globally of this protection racket. So how can you have and this is not me, so I've found this out. They openly say this, that they are advising all these companies on who to censor, and it's an organization that represents the government of Israel. And how can that be that these Silicon Valley companies are taking advice from a totally and utterly, quite demonstrably biased organization on who to censor or not? I mean, the Anti-Defamation League has one heck of a history which has been exposed over the years, including keeping surveillance on activists in the 60s in America on behalf of the apartheid regime, the white apartheid regime in South Africa. It's got a horrendous history, and now it's advising Silicon Valley corporations on who to censor or not. It's extraordinary. And the scale of this protection racket is staggering. If people realize the scale of it, they would be shocked. And it's not representing the interests of Jewish people. It's exploiting Jewish people for its own agenda of censorship to protect the government of Israel from legitimate criticism and legitimate exposure.
And now, David, I want to get straight back to it because you brought up Project Veritas in the last segment. And this is a situation where I guess we can all kick back and say, see, we told you so. This is what is actually going on. And for Jen Janai to respond saying, that it was a casual chat. I'm using air quotes, David, right? A casual chat with someone at a restaurant, and I use some imprecise language, end quote. Well, I would say that it was the exact opposite, that the language was very precise, and she knew exactly what she was saying. When you watched the video and read the article by Project Veritas, what were you left with? What went through your mind?
Well, confirmation of what we already knew, but it was obviously great to have it exposed in a way that no one could deny. And, the power of this system is to have the power to stop exposure of the system. And so what we're seeing now, I'm just looking at my website when I got up this morning, we have Project Veritas's video exposing this extraordinary manipulation and suppression of information by the internet giants, being banned by YouTube, which is owned by Google, and now apparently I read being banned by Vimeo. And once again, we come back to the theme that we've been talking about tonight, Jimmy, that journalism, basic journalism, investigative journalism, is now called hate speech and being discriminatory. And so they've exposed Project Veritas using insiders, obviously, not just in this video, but in others, the extraordinary systematic censorship of Google and Facebook to manipulate information, to manipulate perception. And so what we have is this common theme, which I've been exposing for years, of the manipulation of perception. This is everything. Perception is everything. How people see a situation dictates how they react to it or don't react to it. How they perceive a situation politically dictates whether they vote in support for it or vote against it. And this whole Russian manipulation of the American presidential election hoax, because that's what it is, has been a smokescreen. It's been a smokescreen that has hidden the protection racket's manipulation of American politics, not least through money, and the manipulation of American politics through Silicon Valley. And when you have exposed on camera people who are major players and orchestrators of these companies, who are explaining how they are skewing search engines, they're skewing what is allowed to be seen and not seen on the basis of who they want to be victorious or dominant politically, then you're way, given the control now that these organizations have of information, you are dealing with fundamental destruction of democracy. Because democracy only works if people have the free choice of who to support based on free information. If you don't have both sides of an argument, of a situation, then you're not making a free choice. You're making a choice that is skewed by the information you've received, forming a perception that encourages you to go this way rather than that way. And this is what they're doing. What they're trying to do, and it's not just in American politics, this is just an expression of it. This is across the entirety of human society. They're trying to get and create a one world everything. They want a one world government, a one world currency, a one world central bank, a one world a military, etc. And they also want a one world perception on which all the others are founded. A one world perception. That means that basically there is a narrow band of possible perception and you don't stray from it. Now, this is being manipulated in very obvious ways. One, by censoring information that would encourage people to have a different perception to the narrative, the one world perception. And the other thing is to make life so difficult, either through silencing them and silencing their potential vehicles for communication, and to intimidate them into silence by abuse and threats and consequences, so that you reach a point where only information that feeds that one world perception of everything is what anybody ever hears. That's where we're going. And it's becoming more and more extreme. I mean, when Project Veritas gets an insider to spill the beans on the systematic manipulation of information by Google and Facebook, as they've done over the period, both of which, by the way, are advised, like I said earlier, on what to censor and what not to censor by the Anti-Defamation League and other similar groups. Once you reach the point where, having been caught out by journalism, you then shut down the ability of that journalism to communicate what it's found. You're dealing in the most obvious, blatant tyranny. And I'm quite kind of laid back in the way I kind of respond to people, because let's deal with information. But when I see the Zuckerbergs and the Brins and the Pages and the Dorseys setting themselves up as we're doing this because we have values, which of course they don't have, otherwise we won't be censoring, it just turns my stomach, really. I mean, if you're going to censor to reach a political outcome that you desire, or I would say actually your masters desire, then at least be honest about it. Don't tell me it's because of your values, because clearly you don't have any. We're reaching the point now where they almost don't seem to care whether you know about it or what happens, because they know they have the ability to shut it down.
Well, let me jump in really quick, because you bring up one of the most obvious points that you can, which is you have been talking about this one world situation and possibility and goal for a very long time.
Yeah.
Today, Facebook, YouTube, Google, and you can throw in Twitter to some degree.
Yeah.
Facebook, YouTube, and Google literally control 80% of the information on this planet. Anybody that is connected on this planet, which is 5 billion people, are getting their information from Facebook, YouTube, and Google. That is it. And that is a one-world situation that needs to be feared. And if they control that, David, where are we? And I need your answer on that, because if they suggest that they're fixing this, or that they will fix it, like Zuckerberg, said in Washington recently, you don't know what code writers are doing. You don't really know how the engine is running. You don't know what has been fixed or not, and neither does anybody else. And you have to take them at their word, and they're a monopoly, and there's nothing really, honestly, we can do. And that's the one world situation that has been the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll talk about what I think is the next stage of this as well. You look at how this is unfolded, and it's unfolded systematically. It's not happened by random chance. The plan all along was to move information that leads to human perception onto the internet, because once it's there, algorithms can, through AI, can dictate what people see and hear. And the idea in the end is these AI algorithms are encoded so fiercely that you won't be able to post anything, never mind post it and have it taken down, that is outside of this this narrative. And if you go way back in journalism, and you do have to go way back, you had around the world, in this country, I worked for some of them, and in America, you had a vast array of local newspapers, which most of which started out pretty much in and of themselves, organically. And you had loads of different radio stations, and then television came in. And that was picked off step by step by step. Picked off in the sense that the giants media companies, as they grew in power, they started to buy up these companies. I have an example in this country where I worked for an independent radio station in Birmingham in England as a journalist that was owned by a company that owned the station. And then suddenly these stations started being bought up by one central organization, basically. And from then, these stations became basically a reflection of the centrally dictated agenda. So they weren't independent newsrooms. Like, I worked in the newsroom on this radio station, and no one was telling you what you could not put out. The only criteria was, is it libelous or not? Is it true or not? Which is what journalism should be based on.
Right.
But suddenly, as they were bought up, this central body was now dictating what could not be heard. And in many cases, the newsrooms in these stations, because they were basically music and news stations, the news part of it was shut down, and the news came increasingly centrally to all the stations. So there wasn't any, newsroom basically that was run by the station itself. And this has happened all over the world, not least in America. And then as they started to move towards the internet, these newspapers were not making money anymore, and they started to be shut down and shut down and shut down. There's a group in Britain that owns the most incredible. People in Britain would be shocked if they knew. They buy their local newspaper in Manchester or Birmingham or Coventry or wherever, It's called the Coventry Evening Telegraph. It's called the Manchester Evening News. It's called the Leicester Mercury. But if they only realised all those local newspapers are owned by one group in Britain that controls all of them. And the list of local newspapers that this group owns is stunning in Britain. Same will happen in America. And as they move to the internet, these newspapers increasingly are losing sales, and they're starting to shut down and not be able to continue. They're now moving in on television as well, as television ratings fall, not least CNN. I mean, who keeps that going on the ratings that it has? And so you're seeing this not only movement to the internet, but this demise of any alternative to the internet. And of course, the real alternative to the mainstream everything in whatever form is the alternative media. And so they're targeting that and shutting that down and stopping that having a presence on this internet, which they control. Because let us not forget, the internet is only possible because of military technology and orchestrated by DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon. It openly says we create the internet in its structural form. And they would not have done that. I mean, we're talking about an organization that comes up with death rays and ever more sophisticated ways of killing more people. They allow the internet or help the internet to be created because of the goodness of their heart. They don't have one. So there has to be an ulterior motive to why they did it. And now we're starting to see control of information. And the idea is that in the end, 100% of mainstream, what anyone sees information will be through the internet, and the algorithms will then be in a position to decide absolutely everything that people see and hear. And of course, the next stage from that, and we're moving into it all the time, is to directly connect artificial intelligence to the human mind. This is what people like Ray Kurzweil are talking about at Google and other people now. Because they say it will make us superhuman. It won't. It will make us subhuman, posthuman. They are moving towards that, so that instead of even having to manipulate information to dictate perception, human perception will come direct from AI. It will be AI. It will be the human mind will be AI, and not the human mind that we have come to understand the human mind to be. So, if people think it's bad now, they should strap in for where it's planned to go. And this is why, people look around and they say, well, if I speak out, if I do this, if I do that, what are the consequences for me? Well, that's a process of thought that I never go through, never go through. My criteria is it true? Yes. Okay, let's go with it. And if people don't like it, well, they can do the other thing. That's all right with me, and that's their free choice. But I'm not going to not put out what I know to be right on the basis of what are the consequences for me. People will see that when this new book comes out. And I say this to people who say, what are the consequences for me? I better shut up because what will happen? The consequences of not speaking out now, of not standing up and against this, are far, far, far worse, not least for your kids and grandkids, than they ever are for speaking out now. And if enough of us do it, there's 7.7 billion people in the world. The number of people that are actually knowingly orchestrating this is absolutely tiny by comparison. And the only way that they can achieve this is by controlling information, thus dictating the perceptions of the billions, and by dividing and ruling the billions down manufactured fault lines of race and religion and politics, etc., of gender, so that we're so busy fighting each other that we don't look up and see the strings attached to all of us being held by the same hand. This is a pivotal point in human history, and we will regret it for eternity if we don't look this in the eye and refuse to blink.
Do Do you think, the Zuckerbergs of the world? I mean, I know Jack Dorsey. Okay, let's just put that out there on the table. I know Jack, and I've always, and especially when I first met him, I've always found him to be at least then, a very genuine and cool person. Right? I feel that. I've met him, talked to him, and he helped me open up my Twitter account. Right? Okay, so that being said, I don't feel like they were morally corrupt when they were younger. And I'm not sure if they're morally corrupt now, but those around them and who are manipulating them are. Let's not forget, you brought up DARPA. The internet used to be called the DARPA net. And that's the foundation of what they've built everything on. Do you think that they're morally corrupt now, or it's those that are influencing them and they don't have really anything to do with anything?
Well, two things. If they're not morally corrupt now, then they are not very bright. So it's one or the other, because there is no justification morally or in terms of basic fairness and justice to be manipulating information systematically to create a desired outcome. There's just no that's the foundation of a tyranny. It's not the foundation of a free society. And my view is that nothing should be censored at the point of delivery or before the point of delivery. And it's a very people say, what are you talking about? Well, first of all, there are laws against incitement to violence. There are laws against incitement to burn someone else's house down. There are laws against incitement to for sexual abuse against children, for instance, something I've been exposing for 30 years. And therefore, after the point of delivery, you deal with it. And that's how I say it should be. Because if you're dealing with things after the point of delivery, you do not create a situation in any way, shape or form in which any authority can decide what you see and hear. Because it's out there and then it's dealt with. Once you take on the concept that it's okay to censor before the point of delivery, then you are doing exactly the opposite. You are giving an authority the opportunity and the power to decide what people see and hear. And of course, they won't just, as we're now seeing very clearly, with that power, they won't just censor, the stuff that I'm talking about, and incitement of violence and terrorism. They won't just censor that. In fact, a lot of that stuff is not censored because it suits the system. They'll censor information they don't want people to see, and they'll find more and more excuses for it. It will be hate speech, it will be fake news, it will be somewhere in the middle of nowhere someone's upset. And what you're looking at, you see, is a constant expansion of reasons to censor, a constant expansion of what constitutes something that must be censored. And this, by the way, going back to what we've been talking about in part tonight, this is why we have this new definition of anti-Semitism that has been pushed in the last few years, and more governments and organizations are taking it on. And what this new definition of anti-Semitism does, it's not just, as it should be, the definition of anti-Semitism being hatred of Jewish people for being Jewish. I mean, that's very simple, and it's absolutely abhorrent, but that's the definition. It's criticism of Israel. It's encompassing criticism of Israel. And it's encompassing anyone who happens to be Jewish is anti-Semitic, no matter what they're doing. George Soros is an example. So that's a wonderful classic example of how the definitions of what should be censored and what is hate speech and what is fake news is constantly expanding to encompass more and more people. Now, these people that are apparently running these organizations, they are administering this. And if they're not doing it knowing that what I've just said is true, then they're doing it in ignorance, but certainly one of the two. And you know, when I look at Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill, and I look at him staring into the headlights of an oncoming train, unable to answer the most basic questions, his backbone shivering, and his eyes saying, "Where am I? What am I doing here? What's going on?" The idea that he is ultimately running Facebook is a joke. It's a joke.
Let's back up the truck a little bit, and going back to the one world discussion with Facebook and YouTube and Google. In that, I thought one of the most shocking announcements that I could ever read was the announcement of Libra and the Facebook currency running on the blockchain to develop a banking system for 2.7 billion people around the world. And you have to step back and go, wait a minute, hold on. You already control the information, but now you want to be the bank to half of the world's population? That is a serious amount of control, and it doesn't look like anybody is going to step in and stop this. But that's exactly what it is. It's a banking system for 2.7 billion people.
Yeah, when I watch the news these days, I just shake my head and smile, really, because it's what I was writing about decades ago. And I don't say that to say, look at me, or all that's happening. I said this was happening because to see how right I was. I say it for this reason. If I knew about this 30, 20 years ago, it's not random, is it? It's not happening by chance, is it? Because if it was happening by chance, I couldn't have predicted it. I couldn't have said this is the agenda, and the agenda happened. Not possible. Because it's random, but it's not. It's systematic. The idea is that these internet giants constantly expand and encompass more and more and more of human society. I mean, we shouldn't forget Amazon. Amazon is vital to this. You have a company that started out as a seller of books. That's how it started out. And the idea initially was for Amazon to control the book market and to destroy the independent book production and distribution, and control it if they didn't destroy it. And they've done that. Amazon absolutely dominates beyond belief the global book market and book distribution. And of course, it's gone through the same process as the others, whereby there was no censorship of books on Amazon, and now suddenly there's censorship of books on Amazon. It's the same thing. Pull them in, pull the fishing line out, and then pull the fishing line in. And so Amazon now is massively into, first of all, selling everything and dominating the market. So you basically people do what Amazon says, or their business goes under. But they're also massively, most people don't realize this, into cloud services for the intelligence community and for the military. And so you're seeing Amazon going from just a book site, as it began, to become this massive controller of so much of human society and commerce, and also cloud services. And you're seeing the same with Facebook, where it starts as a social media platform and then expands and expands and expands and encompasses more and more things. And you see the same with Google. It was a search engine, and now it's encompassed more and more and more things. It's massively into AI and the development of that for reasons I've talked about. So's Facebook. So this is what you're seeing, and they are like monsters swallowing human society in all its forms. Now, crucial in the way that society has been systematically, again, structured, is to control money, because money is choice. And what is choice, if you break it down? It's freedom. Freedom is choice. the more choice you have, the more freedom you have. The less choice you have, the less freedom you have. So, going on to what we've talked about today, freedom is the choice to have access to all information on which to make a free choice on what you believe. Censoring that choice, as is what's happened increasingly, is actually to delete that freedom of choice by not giving you the whole picture, but only the picture that will get you to see the world in a certain way. And you say to most people, what would you like to do with your life? And they'll tell you, and you'll say, well, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you making that choice? And they'll say, because don't have the money. So money in society as it's structured is the key so much to choice, which is the key to freedom. And what I've been saying since the 1990s in the books is that the plan has been to get rid of cash and to have a one world, that phrase again, single electronic currency, digital currency. And there's major fundamental freedom reasons for this. If you go into a store now, and increasingly, of course, cash is flying out of circulation all over the world. They're taking out ATMs so you can't get access to it. They're shutting down branches by the score in Britain so you don't get access to it. And they want to push you online with your financial interactions, because then that they A, know everything you're doing, and B, they can control you financially if they want. I mean, you know, you have the old kind of bank book, or what we used to call in this country your building society book, and what you own is in that book. And when you go into the bank or the building society, and not there are many of them left now, they put in your book. This is what used to happen. What you have in their accounts, but now it's online. The potential is there just to wipe people's accounts out. You know, we're seeing now people being censored by YouTube and Facebook and stuff. You're not saying that, and therefore you cannot have discourse on the internet because we control that. Well, if they control the money, they can shut your ability to even operate financially down. So if everything's through the internet and they control the internet, how are you going to function financially if they have control of whether you can do that or not? Because that's the stage we're moving into. And so if you go into a store now and you hand over electronic money, a credit card, and the person says, sorry, the computer won't accept your card, you can still pay cash. Oh, like I say, it's disappearing so fast. But once that cash is gone, which is the idea, you have no other means of purchase once that computer says no to your electronic money. The only other way that you can have financial interaction is through barter. And I'll tell you what they plan with barter. They plan to make it illegal on the basis of they can't tax it. And so if they control what you can say and also control your financial interactions through control of the internet, then they control you. They control what people can hear you say, and they control what you can purchase, not purchase, through control of your money. And let's not forget this either, because this is all part of it. There's this phenomena that's increasing all the time. In fact, someone did a spoof one of Zuckerberg recently, where they take a video and they can make a person say in your voice whatever they want it to say, and the best of them are very difficult to tell, and in the shadows will be technology way beyond what we see at the moment, where you won't be able to tell at all that what the person is saying they've never actually said, although they appear to be saying it in front of your eyes, because the voice is perfect, it's your voice, and your mouth is moving to that voice in a way that you're saying it when you've not said it. Do you know that the technology has reached the point, Jimmy, you probably know, where they can take a still image of someone and they can make that animate and speak to the voice. I've seen presentations in terms of voice mimicking where they can actually type into the system words that they want someone to appear to have said, and the system will make that person's voice appear saying those words, even though that person's never said them. This is something I've been researching for a long time, because it goes back much further, because there's always a difference between what we see in the public arena and what's possible outside the public arena. So imagine this situation, because this is coming if we don't get our finger out. They control your money, they control what you can say and can't say, and they can have people appearing to say things that they've not said. So if say I was barred from the internet and I couldn't get across on the internet what I'm saying, and then videos of me started to appear with me saying outrageous things as if I'm actually saying them, and no one can see that actually it's all been faked, then I am being demonized by fake videos, at the same time that I, the real person, cannot point out that these videos are fake. This is the scale that we're going into. I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow, but not too many tomorrows away. This is where they're going towards, the complete and utter control of perception by the complete and utter control of what people see and hear. And so this currency that has been announced by Facebook is absolutely classic. And you know, I have been saying over the years, and I'm not being very popular in some quarters for saying it, when you're talking about Bitcoin and stuff like that, I've said just hold on a minute, let's get too excited, because while Bitcoin has been very good for people who were in at the start, they made an enormous amount of money. I've met some of them, and good luck to them, really. But ask the question, always ask the question, who benefits? And they don't mind a few people benefit in the initial, start of it, just as they didn't mind the free flow of information. Well, they did, but they knew they had to accept it. The free flow of information when the internet first started. But where is this going? And whether it's a blockchain or whether it's whatever, and it's interesting that this is what this currency of Facebook, the system, is now moving towards. It's a cashless currency. Now, I have no problem with cashless digital currency. It can be very efficient, especially when you're going around the world and moving between countries. All right, you don't have to get rid of that. I'm not saying go back to just cash. But once cash is gone, then the Armageddon of money control and people control then opens up. While you've got cash, you've got this alternative to this control. If you want to operate in the cash society and only use cash, you can. And if the system turns down your digital money or shuts you down on the internet, then you're financially on the internet, through the internet, then you can go to cash and use that. Once cash is gone, it's over. There is no alternative to that which is utterly controlled by the system. And this Facebook thing is part of that.
I've often thought one of my fears in the cashless society is this. You know, you're walking into a convenience store, right, and you see a guy on the ground sitting there homeless, right, and you're like, man, what's up? They turned me off 2 weeks ago. You know, and it wouldn't take long for anybody to go to the very, very bottom of everything if you were shut off. It would take days. If you can't eat, you can't buy food, no electricity, no gas, no car payments, nothing. If you get turned off in a cashless society, there's nothing you can do about it.
And that is exactly the plan. That has been the plan all along. One of the things I've been writing about for, again, decades is something I call the Hunger Games Society, which is, I say, where society is being directed. And the Hunger Games Society, if people, and of course I use that phrase from the Hunger Games movies, because you saw in the Hunger Games movies this elite, this tiny elite dictating to everybody who and everyone else lives in poverty, basically. This is what I mean by the Hunger Games Society. If people imagine a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is a tiny, tiny few people. People now talk about the 1%. At the bottom of the pyramid is basically the rest of humanity living in financially limited servitude at the behest of the few. And in between the elite and the masses in the pyramid, there is a merciless police military state in the end, because that's what they want. That's why police are looking more and more and acting more and more like the military, which is holding that status quo situation and protecting the 1% from the challenge of the rest of humanity, and dictating the impositions of the 1% upon the rest of humanity. That's what this police state that's unfolding around the world more and more is designed to do. We're moving towards this Hunger Games society. And of course, you've brought up a very, very relevant point. How do you get the mass of humanity into that Hunger Games situation where they have no financial control over their lives? Well, one key massive way would be to put all money on the internet and then decide who has it or not. And there are other ways that they're doing it step by step economically as well. This is why, the homeless situation or around the world, but certainly in parts of Los Angeles now, is absolutely horrendous and getting more so. It's part of it's all this movement to the Hunger Games Society, and you're absolutely right. I've seen interviews with people who were what you might call middle class or upper middle class in America. They had a good job, they had a big house or decent house, and they had holidays and families, and they had the money coming in to finance that. And then suddenly the job went. And very, very quickly, you're absolutely right, very, very quickly, those people go from the nice house and the holidays and the car to sleeping in a car or in the street. So when people who have money at the moment say it's not my problem, well, stick around, because it's going to be. Because if you're not part of this, shall we call it the 1%, then they want what you've got as well. They want everything. Therefore, we're all in this together, and we ought to realize that. If we don't stand for fairness and justice for everybody, then we don't stand for it for anybody, because fairness and justice, by their very nature, are all-encompassing terms. They're all-encompassing states of being, where you want fairness and justice for everybody, not just yourself. This is something that people are going to have to come to terms with very quickly, that someone else's censorship, for instance, very soon becomes their censorship. Because, so many things are being allowed now to be circulated because it suits the system for that information to circulate. The moment it suits it not to circulate because it's moved into a different stage, then the people that are cheering when people are censored now will be the ones that will be censored. And it's that line, that saying from that German Pastor Niemöller, the time of the Nazis, or referring to the Nazis. First they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I did nothing. Then they come for the trade unionists, I was not a trade unionist, so I did nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That's what's happening. And I would say to these so-called progressives, what I call Soros progressives, because he's transformed the left in not just Britain but around the world with his money. what you're cheering today will be you tomorrow. And if you don't see that now, then take the consequences, because they're coming.
The videos that you were talking about, the manipulation of the voice and the face and so forth, those are called deep fakes.
Deep fakes, yeah.
Yeah, deep fakes. And you brought up the Hunger Games, and this is how the universe works, David. You have to love synchronicity. You bring up the Hunger Games while speaking about deep fakes, and there was a video that went around with Jennifer Lawrence, star of the Hunger Games, right, where Steve Buscemi's face was put on Jennifer Lawrence for one of her speeches at an awards thing, right? Well, anyway, this deep fake was so good, and I watched it, and instead of laughing like, "Oh, that's cool," terror went down my spine. Just thought, if this can convince me, and this is in the early stages of development, this can be used for anybody. They could put my face, they could put your face, they could do whatever they want and convince anybody, to the point where now we no longer know what is real and what is not. And somebody with that kind of power that wants to freak everybody out in a nanosecond, right, at the speed of light with the internet, will be able to do just that. We're coming up to an election season here in the United States, and the ability to do this is going to be manipulated. I can nearly guarantee you that is one of the battles we're going to be facing here in the next year.
It is absolutely going to happen, and ironically, it will be a battle politically between the usual masks on the same face, representing apparently different parties, but actually representing the one-party state. I'll tell you what really hit me in terms of what you just said, Jimmy, was many years ago. I mean, people might remember how many years ago it was. I took I know how long ago it must be, because my son Jamie, who's now a big strapping 26-year-old, he was a little boy at the time, and I took him to a movie, and you'll remember the name. It was about a mouse living with a family, and it was a kind of animated mouse, but it was and lived with his family, and the mouse spoke English, but what they had was in the movie was a gang of cats, like like a human gang of cats, and they were after this mouse and etc. But what struck me all those years ago is these cats were speaking as if they were human. And when you looked at their mouth movement, you couldn't tell that it was all fake. It seemed as if these cats, and they weren't animated cats, they were cats, but they'd manipulated their mouths technologically to appear to be speaking human language, and it was so amazingly done. I thought at that moment, seeing's no longer believing. It never was, but even more now, seeing is not believing. And now look, that what was actually used in that movie to make that so effective is now mainstream. And if you then, like I said earlier, look at what they could do then in the movies, and what they can do now, with packages, technology packages on the internet, what the heck can they do in the shadows now in terms of producing these videos where you will not be able to see the join, and you will absolutely not be able to know if someone's actually said it or they have not. This is the world we're moving into.
Yeah, it's going to be, I got to take a break right here, but it's going to be the art of building a defense against deep fakes. In other words, that's not me. I'm not in that, but that's not me. Somebody created that. And now you are going to be put into a position, this adversarial position, of defending yourself against a deep fake and being bogged down with that. Meanwhile, the deep fake is out there, David. The damage is done. right? And that's what's going to be the long-lasting thing, is what is in people's memories and what was said. And I envision something like this. Couple of candidates are running for political office, and then the video surfaces of one of those candidates talking off camera, maybe even in a crowd of people, right? A statement is made, and then that deep fake hits the internet. It could be the craziest statement ever, but now that candidate is going to have to defend a deep fake video, one that won't be able to be proven what is real and what is not, right? Because it's too real, and that's where I see this going.
Yeah, and don't let's not forget that this technology came out of the military. In books long ago, I was writing about the voice recognition technology that was being developed by the military, and here we are, we're back at DARPA again, which is driving all this. There are others in the shadows that are driving DARPA, but at that level, DARPA is driving all this, like it drives the Silicon Valley horror. They tried it out among the military. The military developed voice copying technology first.
Before we get to solutions, I want to discuss entropy. In that, is this just going to play out and unravel and shatter like a glass as physics has intended, and there's nothing that we can do, that we've set ourselves up for a crash?
Well, you need to, or we need to appreciate the nature of reality before we can talk about solutions and before we can talk about where this is going and if it ultimately goes there. The greatest suppression of all is the suppression of the nature of reality that we are experiencing, how we interact with it, and who we are. Ultimately, what is this I that we talk about? And if you believe, because that's what we're supposed to believe, that we are our labels, that's who we are, because that's what most people self-identify with, don't they? And they're told to self-identify with that. You are a man, woman, black, white, transgender. You are a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, whatever. These labels are simply experiences that our eternal I, a state of awareness, no form, just a state of awareness, is having. And what the system has done on purpose, if you go deep enough in the shadows, is to set up a system in which we are handed our labels from the earliest possible age, and we self-identify with those labels, and we identify others by their labels. And once you do that, of course, you have limitless potential for divide and rule by playing labels off against each other. And what we're having now is the constant subdividing of previous labels into smaller labels. This is what the whole self-identity and identity politics is all about. It's about creating more labels that you can play off against each other. So now we're having feminists and transgender activists in conflict with each other through that subdivision. And the other thing is you're creating more and more smaller and smaller subdivisions of labels for people to self-identify with. So what I call their I am R's get smaller and smaller and more limited. And what this is doing is taking people further and further and further from an influence and a perception of the true I, which is consciousness, the consciousness that's having the experience. And what transformed my life, just as an example, is when I stopped self-identifying with my labels that I've been given since birth and started self-identifying with being the consciousness having those experiences. I'm not David Icke. David Icke is a name given to my brief experience in this reality. What I am is the consciousness having those experiences. And then you start to look at reality itself. If this world is, as we experience it, solid, and everything is apart from everything else, we literally do live in a physical world of division, then what is happening now is unstoppable. It's unstoppable because they have control of so much already that it's going to be impossible. And if you have the perception that we live in a solid, physical, everything apart from everything world, then the only thing that you can really think of is we must fight the enemy. This is where you get we must stockpile weapons and all that stuff to fight the enemy, which is what the quote enemy wants, because it gives them the opportunity to have an excuse with your weapons to blow you away with state-of-the-art weaponry. So the understanding of the nature of the true I and the understanding of the nature of reality are fundamental to how we get out of here. And this is again why, if you go deeper into this, why the target is primarily, more than anything else, human perception. Imagine the internet, Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi internet is the entirety of the internet, and potentially you can experience anywhere on the internet and potentially the totality of the internet. But you are choosing through your connection to the Wi-Fi internet, your computer, you are choosing only to go here or only to go there. This is your perception, and so that's all you do. So what appears on the screen of your computer is a reflection of your perception. Your perception of reality appears on the screen as that part of the internet which your perception of reality will manifest on the screen. Now, if you take, as I've been saying for nearly 30 years, the human body, which is simply a vehicle for eternal consciousness to experience itself and experience different realities, and this reality, it's a biological computer. And it will decode a certain band of frequency, which is called visible light, etc. And visible light is absolutely tiny compared with what exists in the universe. That's mainstream science. It's laughably minute. And yet everything that we see and experience visually is within that tiny smear of frequency we call visible light, which is only a smear of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's how small it is. And if we keep with the label consciousness, as I call it, then that will give us a perceptual myopia, both of ourselves and society, that will mean that we will only interact with the infinity of possibility, what I call the cosmic Wi-Fi, within the bounds of that perception. Just as you go on the internet and your perception will dictate where you go and where you don't go. And so what's happening is the base form of this reality is waveform information. Think Wi-Fi. And this biological computer is interacting with that Wi-Fi, that cosmic Wi-Fi, that potential possibility and probability. And all perceptions, like everything, every emotion, every thought, every perception is a frequency. And the perceptual state that we're in is dictating the frequency that we are resonating on, that we are operating on. Hate is a frequency. Love is a very different frequency. Depression is a frequency. Joy is a very different frequency. And so our perceptions are dictating all the time the frequency band that we're operating on. And that frequency band dictates how we are and where we are interacting with this cosmic Wi-Fi field of waveform information. In other words, what we are manifesting into an experience, because what the computer is doing when you are going around the internet in a Wi-Fi field is it's locking in only to that part of the Wi-Fi field that relates to your perception, because it's putting that part of the Wi-Fi field that you are perceived to want to access on the screen. In the same way, we are doing the same. Our perceptions are dictating what, where, and what scale of this cosmic Wi-Fi that we are accessing. And if you look at the five senses, look at what they're doing. They're taking waveform information, what I would call this cosmic Wi-Fi, they're turning it into electrical information, they're communicating it to the brain, and the brain then decodes that electrical information into what I would say is holographic digital information, which is the world that we think is an experiences outside of us, but is actually inside of us. Just like I'm looking at a computer now, and what I'm looking at is inside the computer. It's decoded inside the computer from the internet, what I'm actually I've connected the computer to. And so if you have a perception that the world is solid and physical, then that leads to one word above anything else: limitation. I can't, it's not possible.
Right.
But when you realize that human perception is driving and creating the very reality that we're experiencing, and that excuse me, individually we are creating our own life experience from our perceptual state, collectively the collective perceptions of humanity are creating human society. So if you have, for instance, a perception of I'm my labels, I'm just little me, I have no power, then that perceptual state has a frequency, and it will be a very small, narrow, low vibrational frequency which has been generated from that perceptional state. You will then interact with the cosmic Wi-Fi of possibility and probability, and you will only manifest in your life a reflection of that interaction frequency band, and that will reflect your perception. You will live a life in which it will be almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you perceive yourself to be is what you experience yourself to be. And so if you transform that self-identity and you say, I am not my labels, I am infinite awareness having an experience called those labels.
That's the solution, right? Is it just information, or is there something else to it?
Well, it's information to lead to that self-reflection and re-evaluation of self-identity, but that can come spontaneously. You just got to open your mind to all possibility instead of being focused only on possibility that you've downloaded. And what you've just described, and I talk about that a lot, is a human life which is nothing more in its everyday experience state in this world than a perceptual download. It's a perceptual download from cradle to grave, through parents, through education, what we call education, through media and peer pressure. We're constantly being infused with a download of what is perceived to be normal. And of course that normal is all about labels. And so what this perceptual programming, is what it is doing, is forming human perception and human self-identity on the basis of labels, which leads to a narrow band of perception, which leads to a narrow band of interaction with possibility and probability, cosmic Wi-Fi, which leads to a consequence life experience that reflects that perception. This is the game. That's the game explained in its foundation form in just a few words. And when, as I was saying earlier, when you re-self-identify as I am consciousness having that experience, and potentially, I am all consciousness. And this is the irony when people talk, throw abuse at me, oh, he's a this, he's a that. I am the ultimate, in my philosophy, a non-racist, but also non-label. Because what I'm saying is the labels are what divide us. The names we give ourselves are what divide us. What we are, all of us, is the same consciousness having different experiences with different points of attention. So ultimately, we are all each other. That's the irony in all this. And if you want to stop people having that ultimate power and that ultimate unity of we're all one, then you want to divide them with labels. That's what the labels are all about. But what happens when you self-identify with being consciousness having the experience is your self-identity expands massively, because you're not Ethel working at the store anymore. You're not Bill driving the bus anymore. You are the potentially infinite awareness having that experience. Now that reevaluation of self-identity, that expansion of self-identity, leads to an expansion of the frequency band with which you are interacting with possibility, probability. It increases the frequency level at which you are interacting. And so suddenly you start to manifest in your life with this feedback loop between perception and possibility. Your life starts to expand as your consciousness expands. How people listening to this show who've been through this process or are going through this process, and many are, it's what we call awakening. What's awakening? It's awakening from the program. It's not awakening to something we're not. We are consciousness. It's awakening to the understanding that we are consciousness. It's awakening from the program that tells us that we are labels. That's what the awakening is. And when people go through this process, I went through it myself, and so I'm well aware of what happens. People suddenly start to realize they have, you mentioned it in the show already, synchronicity in their lives. They have amazing coincidences that just kind of happen, and it's like, oh, amazing, what's the chances of that? And these synchronicities weren't happening before. Why? Because you were interacting with such a narrow band of possibility and probability. You weren't manifesting that possibility of synchronicity and how life starts to become an adventure and moves with ease rather than limitation. Now you are expanding this self-identity and you are interacting with a much greater swathe of possibility and probability. Now you are manifesting this greater possibility of synchronicity, and your life changes. So this transformation of human society from what it is to what it could be has to come from a transformation of human perception, because collectively that will change everything. And it's the control of perception which has created the world that we're in. It is the releasing from control of perception that will bring down this nonsense, which is all based on getting the population to perceive its own prison, and will start to create a world from a transformed perception that will be a very different one to the one we live in now. And if we go on to this whole AI connection to the human mind, this is to control perception so totally that you stop this self-identification of self that will transform everything. Deep in the shadows, these people know how this works, and they know if they control perception, they control the world, and we must not allow them any longer to do that. Question everything and ask who benefits from me believing this, and it will give you some very interesting answers.
Do you think that there's got to be a pretty serious disruption to shake some people at their core? And I don't know what that would be, but somebody getting caught, or maybe a deep fake or a video where somebody was told one thing and their beliefs, and it could be political, it could be religious, it doesn't matter, where they suddenly find out that that same source of information lied to them and that maybe everything is incorrect. Do you think it would be something like that? And not necessarily the downfall of civilization where we have to restart this thing over again. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, only if perception changes. You see, some amazing things have been released by WikiLeaks, and the person who's the front man for WikiLeaks is now in jail. So what was released alerted people to the fact that they've been lied to.
Right.
But the world goes on.
Right.
The crucial thing is, and I can't say it enough, and it may seem trite and simple, but it's the foundation of everything. We need to reevaluate our self-identity, because this world is a manifestation of human perception and human self-identity. That's why there are so many little me self-identities in the world, right across the world, the vast majority, that little me is manifesting a little me life, and little me lives are those that allow a few to dictate those lives, who realize they're not little me. And so this is the stadium in which this is played, self-identity and perception of reality. That's where we have to start focusing. And, you know, from my personal point of view, this book that's coming out in September is devastatingly controversial. It shouldn't be, really, because it's true. But in the climate that it's coming out, it will be one of the most controversial books ever written, because of the climate in which it is appearing. But from then on, although I'll still keep going with uncovering the conspiracy, my focus becomes transforming human perception of self and perception of reality, not by telling them what to think, but by saying, hey, here's another way of looking at the world. It's going to be my focus, because that's the way we change this. We're not going to change it by just exposing Mark Zuckerberg, exposing this person or that person. It has to be a transformation of human perception, which can be spontaneous, can come out of nowhere, and then suddenly you see it. The number of people I've met who've said, it just came so fast. Suddenly I just saw it, I got it. And it wasn't I got it over weeks or months, I just got it. It just, everything fell into place, because you've moved into that state of expanded awareness where you access that got it perception, where you can see the dots as a pattern and not just individual dots. You can see where it's going. This is what we need to do. And you see, the more you try to fight the enemy as they perceive it, the more you think we must get the testosterone going. Not there's anything wrong with that, but more you think we must do that and fight the enemy, you are just doing what the quote enemy wants you to do. Wants you to fight, wants you to operate in those low vibrational states, because you're playing at its stadium, and it's an expert on its stadium, i.e. manipulating human perception into that state. We need to start to reevaluate self-identity, and I tell you from personal experience, it will not only transform your life and your life experience, it will transform collectively. If enough people go through that process, it will transform human society. And it won't be that we have to bring this down or bring that down and bring the other down. It will just naturally happen, because what humans do not perceive cannot manifest. We have to perceive it first, and then it manifests. We have to perceive where we want to go on the internet before we can manifest it on the screen. Perception is everything.
Well, this is what I find so fascinating, David. We went through a pretty dramatic realization of fake news and manipulation of the masses. We went through that totally exposed. We went through Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and privacy rights. We went through that. We're going through censorship and what YouTube is doing. all of this, it's being thrown. Deep fakes are out there. People are talking about it. It seems like all of it is there to make those changes and to wake people up. But you said it yourself. It seems like this 24-second news cycle, not 24 hours, blows by so quick that people are in an I don't care mode and they don't want to wake up. And that's that. We can't give them any more evidence. Project Veritas, that's about the scariest thing that you can have exposed out there. Is it enough? I don't know. We keep laying it out there for everyone, and we keep moving forward and status quo situation.
Well, I think from my personal experience, this is the situation. All those things are having a massive effect. As I travel around the world and I meet more and more people in different cultures and different situations, there is an awakening to the world going on that is unprecedented. It's happening. We have to see the difference between the microphone voices, those that dominate the microphones, and those that don't. And among those who don't, they have often a very different perception of the world than the microphone voices. That's why they don't get on the microphones. That's why I don't get on the microphones in the mainstream. But the question they have is, I can see it up to an extent anyway, but what do I do? And again, I come back to this. If you perceive the world from that situation, of I can see what's happening, but what do I do? If you perceive the world as solid and physical and as we experience it, then what can you do? What can you do? But there's nothing I can do. I'd like to do something, but I can't. Once you realize that perception is driving it, self-identity is driving it, then you can start, without going out into the street with a banner, you can start to impact upon reality by changing your self-identity, by operating minute by minute as I am consciousness, eternal, infinite consciousness, having this experience. That will transform your life, and collectively it will transform everything. This is the next stage that we need to go into, because this is what's going to bring an end to this thing. Because dealing with it in the quote physical world is not going to do it, because they control that physical world. That perception, as we perceive the physical world as physical and in the way that we experience it, we are experiencing and we are perceiving and putting ourselves into, illusory as it may be, the world that they control. Withdrawing from that world in terms of perception and coming from a different point of self-identity, a more expanded point of self-identity, is what will withdraw us from the impact of that world, and thus on our perceptions and thus on our experience. This is the process that's going to bring an end to this. It's no good people thinking we're going to change it in the physical world. The physical world as we perceive it is just a movie screen. If you don't change what's coming from the projector, you won't change the movie. It's no good shouting at the screen and waving a banner at it and saying change the movie. It ain't going to change unless you change the real. And the real is our self-perception and our perception of reality.
I want to get a couple of more quick questions in before we depart. I need some information from you. I want to go back to Australia for a second. Did that get resolved?
No, it didn't. What happened is it was so outrageous because the immigration ministry had given me a visa in the September of last year because there was no reason not to be. I'd been there 10 times before on speaking tours, and as the immigration minister who inflicted the ban agreed, there's never been a problem. 4 hours before my plane left LA, suddenly there was a problem, and I had failed to pass the character test. That's what it said, and because I was a threat to a section of Australian society. Well, full enough, I never have been before, but suddenly I was. I won't, have to tell people what section of that society it was claimed to be, and also my views on vaccinations and on what I say is the hoax of human-caused global warming, justifying centralization of power. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. That I wouldn't be allowed in. So there was no real reason for me to be banned, except they don't want people to hear what I say. So we got a lawyer involved in Sydney, and they made a challenge to the decision by the minister, a guy called David Coleman. And as I speak, and we're talking last February, Jimmy, as I speak, the ministry hasn't even replied. So that's what you're dealing with. And it cost us £30,000 in lost money that had been spent hiring venues, buying plane tickets, etc., and everything else that are the costs of a tour. That minister, 4 hours before my plane left, has no comeback on that and no consequences for that, and it cost us £30,000. What was that, $50,000, something like that? And this is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a situation where they don't have to justify themselves; they just have to do it. And if we're here now, where are we going to be not too far into the future? This is why we need to address this now, but address it in a way that's going to make a difference, and that comes from human perception, not fighting the enemy.
I would have thought after David Coleman's position in the letter and the media push through this, not only on this show but other shows, and that being brought up to the public, that Australia would have said, this is not a good, censorship is not a good position for us, and let's fix this now and invite David over. They didn't even reach out. Nothing has. That's it. And if they did, would you go back to Australia and speak?
Oh, I go back to Australia tomorrow, but I wouldn't go without an absolutely solid gold guarantee that the visa wouldn't be revoked at the last minute, because you can't go on losing $50,000 again and again and again and again, because that leads only one place, and that's the situation that they can put you in simply by making a decision based on politics. And by the way, basically that ban was instigated via the minister by one man, a guy called Devere Abramovich, who runs a man and a dog organization called the Anti-Defamation Commission, which is part of the global Israeli protection racket. And on the basis of what he claimed I was saying, and I'm not, the ban was instigated, and so that this is what you're dealing with. And there's one man, through the minister, two people, decided what 25 million Australians can and cannot choose to see and hear. This is the scale of the tyranny that we are involved in. And what's supposed to happen is that terror of being dubbed an anti-Semite means you don't address the elephant in the living room of what's actually behind this, which is this protection racket for Israel's government operating out of, in the end, Israel. But I'll tell you this, I will go back to Australia. I will go back. I will go back, because the power of consciousness in the end is much more powerful than the power of oppression and the power of censorship. And that's the power that will transform this world from what it's become to what it could be.
And I wanted to address the Aero Theater here really quick. On that day, here in Los Angeles, I started to get the tech. I had a show to do that night, so I couldn't attend the premiere. But I started to get text and emails. Jimmy, they've banned. We're down here. They've stopped the premiere. You've got to be able to do. And I thought, this can't be. And now, going through that mentally, I thought that only occurred here in Los Angeles. But it happened in the UK too, right?
It happened in the UK. Oh, by the way, just very quickly, that is a point, you see. It's not a part of the whole perception process. If you demonize someone in the minds of people, then anyone that supports that person or is interested in that person is painted as the demonized person. So here you had all these people in Los Angeles who were heading for the premiere, and we couldn't tell them that it was cancelled until we got back through the LA rush hour traffic to our hotel near the airport that could put out an email to tell people don't come because it's been cancelled. So lots of people turned up just to see a thing saying a message saying it's cancelled. They didn't know why, didn't know anything. Now, that was obviously going to happen to the people that turned up, but they didn't care because the process goes, he's a demon, therefore anyone who supports him is a demon, so it doesn't matter what happens to them. And the same happened in Britain. We were on a train coming down from the first premiere in Manchester in the north of England, and the venue in London, which was owned by the TUC. Now, the TUC is the Trade Union Congress, and the Trade Union Congress is the umbrella organisation of trade unions in Britain. Do you remember when trade unions used to represent the working class? Anyone that does remember that must have a heck of a memory, because it no longer does. And they sent an email to Jamie saying, we're cancelling the premiere. He brilliantly found another venue by the time the train got to London. But they said, we're cancelling it because we believe in inclusivity. So you see where that's coming from. People have contacted them and saying, oh, this David Icke, he's going to say this, he's going to say that, this film's all going to say this, going to say that, Renegade, none of which it does. And so without coming to me and saying, well, we've just been told this, is this true? Well, no, it's not. Oh, okay. Right. Well, let's watch the film and then we'll decide. Okay, fair enough. But no, it's just cancel it. And look at the irony of that. We believe in inclusivity, therefore we're excluding you. It's extraordinary. The lack of self-awareness is extraordinary. This is where you get organizations like Antifa acting like fascists while calling themselves anti-fascist. They have no self-awareness that they are everything they claim to rail against. It's just crazy, but you have to deal with it. And when you're dealing with a world that it is controlled by a cabal that basically runs the world by controlling information, which controls perception, then don't expect a round of applause when you take it on. No one said it was going to be easy, and we have to do what we have to do and not think about consequences of doing it. I never do. My criteria: is it true? Yeah, I'm going with it. Consequences, don't even think about it. Because if you do that, what you're saying is, I'm not going to do and say what I believe to be right because I fear the consequences of saying what I believe to be right. No way I'm going through that thought process. And I just urge people who are going through that, the consequences of doing so collectively are unthinkable.
You bring, inclusiveness is a brilliant word to use because it influences the mindset, right? Oh, they're all about inclusiveness, and in this Project Veritas expose with this hidden camera footage, with this leaker, Google is using the word fairness when they're discussing how they want to balance out everything. They want fairness across the board. And they're using it incorrectly, but the perception of the word fairness in their meetings and with employees and everything else is that they are the good guys, right? It's about fairness across the board. And that is what I find, the use of that word and what it really means in those conversations, I find it appalling. But yet that's the way that they do it. It goes back to perception and the perception of the word fairness or inclusive.
What we're looking at, Jimmy, is classic George Orwell 1984 newspeak.
Spot on.
This is the concept, Orwell's concept of old speak, where the language had words that could express your thoughts and express your opinions in detail, being replaced by what he called newspeak, which were words that were basically designed not to say anything, not to upset anybody, not to say anything at all that was in any way radical about anything. And that he made the point, absolutely right, that we think in words. On the level of thinking, I mean, you go to the level of intuition. Intuition doesn't speak to you in words. It speaks to you in knowing. Speaks to you in pictures, not pixels. Therefore, it's coming from a much higher level of consciousness. That's why intuition is so different to thought. Thought is the communication and perception level of the program, and so when you think, you're trying to work something out, and when you intuitively know, you don't have to work it out. You just know. But when we operate on this level of thought, we think in words. So, as Orwell pointed out, if you suppress the language or invert the language, which is what you're talking about with this thing about fairness, where unfairness becomes fairness. I mean, look at Orwell's book. It's all about inverting the meaning of words to invert the perceptions of the population. So it means that if you suppress the language, you delete the words, the old speak, that you could express your thoughts and opinions in detail, then in the end, you don't even have the language to form your own thoughts, because you don't have the words through which to express those thoughts to yourself. You go through basically a firewall on what you can actually think. And he was saying this all those decades ago, and it's unfolding now, because he wasn't coming like Aldous Huxley in Brave New World at all purely from his imagination. He had some inkling of where this was going. That's why he's been so accurate. That's why people that insiders that I quote in my books decades ago were describing in 1969. I remember one of them. He was expressing exactly the world that's unfolding now in detail, because this is not something that's random. It's something that's long planned. So this manipulation of language is vital. And there's another element of this, these people that are operating as censors for Facebook and Google and all these people, YouTube, apart from the ones that are doing it absolutely with a clear agenda, who want to do it, and who are basically psychopaths and have no feelings for the consequences. They just want control. I'm talking in the shadows. There's lots of people who are actually making it happen by making the decisions, by following the orders of how to do this and how to do that, who on a personal level have to justify that to themselves without looking in the mirror and seeing what they're actually doing. So they're not only trying to convince the population that unfairness is fairness, they're trying to convince themselves.
That's right.
So that they can justify to themselves the tyranny that they're perpetuating. And once you get into the realms of self-delusion and self-manipulation, then you're going down a very dark and road for you as a consciousness, as a human being. And so again, you're looking at programmed people programming other people, while the few at the top who understand how it's all working pull the strings of everybody.
Well, she, in the video, Jen Jedi, who is head of innovation, right, AI at Google, she is absolutely convinced in her own mind that she's right, that if manipulating the masses is okay. And that's the crazy part about this. She thinks her moral compass is pointing north.
Yeah, well, this is the virtue signaling. Virtue signaling has become a disease.
Right.
People make decisions not based on facts, not based on what is right and what is fair, but on how they perceive themselves to be looked upon. So you have people saying we have to do something about the homeless because I'm a nice person. Look at me, I care about the homeless. We have to do something about the people not having jobs or having low incomes because look at me, I'm a nice person. I'm a good person, look at me. And at the same time, we must have open borders so that anyone can come into the country. Because why? Because I'm a good person. I'm a nice person. Look at me. But when you say, well, okay, how does open borders span or scan across doing something about the homeless and doing something about low wages and no jobs? How does that scan? They don't put the two together because the only deal in town is, the only show in town is, how does what I say and stand for make me look? It's all about self. It's narcissism on steroids. And you raise an interesting point. In my last book, I was talking about this mentality, and I'm saying the only right in this mentality's opinion is I am right. I am right. And I am right. I'm a good person. And I am right. Now this means, this is again the thought process. It's all psychological. I am right. Therefore, anyone who says anything different must by definition be wrong. And if they're wrong, what does it matter if they don't have freedom of speech? Because they're wrong. This is the process that goes through these what pass for minds. And this is the same thought process that says David Icke is evil, therefore anyone that supports his work is evil, therefore what's it matter if they're put out when we cancel a venue? What matter if they don't have freedom to choose what they want to see? This is the same thing. It all comes down to I am right. It all comes down to narcissism. And so you convince people that they are good people. Look at the heart of my sleeve. And that they are right and virtuous and have values. And from that narcissistic self-perception, they justify the suppression of everyone else, and they call it fairness. It is fair. I tell you why it's fair, because we're manipulating the information that people receive so that they'll think like we do because we are right. This is how it works, and I'm sure that's going through Dorsey's psychology. It's going through Zuckerberg's psychology, Brin and Page's psychology, Bezos's psychology. This is what we're dealing with, and how it works.
This is what I think. Okay, and I hope you're with me.
Yeah.
We have this disclosure movement, right? That's going. Everybody's talking. I think we should have an exposure movement. I think we should change the definition and the perception of what everybody's goal should actually be. It should be exposure, David, not disclosure. We need to expose what is actually going on. Are you with me?
Yeah, but on the disclosure, just very quickly, we have to be very careful about that. Because, of course, I've spoken and written at length that I'm saying that in the background, in the shadows, beyond human sight, beyond this band of visible light, shall we say, this manipulation is ultimately being orchestrated by a non-human force. So all this disclosure and extraterrestrial disclosure and all that stuff, I should be, which is now more happening with the Navy saying, oh yeah, we are having all these unexplained craft doing things we can't explain, and we're going to make it easier for our pilots to report them and all this stuff, and it's coming out in the media. I should be saying, yeah, see, told you, but I'm not. because we have to be streetwise. And you know that one of the greatest forms of perceptual control is being told what you want to hear. And this is the first thing. If you're told what you want to hear, you're more likely to believe it. If you're being told what you don't want to hear, then you're more likely not to believe it and to resist it because you don't want it to be true. And what I would say about this disclosure, which is unfolding, is we've got to be very, very careful, because do extraterrestrials, non-human life exist? I mean, are you kidding? Look at the night sky, for goodness sake. But there's also the potential to produce a fake alien invasion, quote, which justifies the massive global centralization of power, politically and militarily, to meet the threat. And that centralization of global political and military power is exactly where this conspiracy is planned to lead, with the world government and the World Central Bank and the World Army, etc. So I'm all for disclosure, or even more for exposure. But because disclosure will always, if it's coming from government, only disclose what it feels is good for itself. Exposure is a much better word, you're right. We need to just be very streetwise and just observe this and ask that classic question again: who benefits from me believing this? And if this disclosure does move on, and they start to say we need to centralize power to meet the threat, then alarm bells should be flying off everywhere. And I've been involved or interacted over this last 30 years with the UFO research movement. There's some very good people in it, but there are also some very naive people in it as well, and who will definitely respond to being told what they want to hear. And react by saying, "See, I told you so," when actually they're being played like a violin, potentially. So it's very important that we don't kind of get excited with this stuff that's unfolding. We just stay calm and say, who benefits and what are they trying to justify as a result of this?
It's always the question that I keep putting. This is all great, it's fun, but why? That you have to ask yourself that question, why? Because it's coming at us from all directions right now, and it's never been like this before. And you have to just stop. It's okay. It's okay to say, "Yeah, I see. I told you so." You know, UFOs are real or whatever. But you have to ask why. Why now?
One of the things that I say to people is, if you ask me, "What's the agenda?" I say, one, look at what you're not allowed to have another opinion about, and you'll find that's the agenda. And the other thing is, if it comes out of nowhere and is suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. And that would apply very potentially to what's happening now with this whole disclosure thing.
Thank you so much, David. Looking forward to the new book. I can't wait to get you back on the show. Give my best to Jamie and the family. And keep rolling that rock uphill, my friend. Thank you so much.
Okay, mate. If anyone wants to watch Renegade, go through davidicke.com. They can watch it now if they like. And it's been very well received. It's very encouraging.
Yeah, the movie is incredible, and I'll let you know some other stuff behind the scenes in an email as soon as we wrap here.
All right, mate.
But Renegade is incredible, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much, David.
Cheers, Jimmy. People say I talk about some weird stuff, some far out stuff. But how about that chair that you're sitting in isn't solid? How weird is that? This reality is nothing like we think it is.
When I saw what Icke is doing, like I was a bit jealous on him. Like, wow, look at what this guy's doing.
I don't know if anybody else could do it but him, actually.
We are in a period now where speaking your truth is not just important, it's utterly crucial to where humanity goes from here. The world needs renegades.